Belle Gibson was born on October 8th, 1991. She lived an ordinary Australian life. However, something flipped, like a switch in her mind, that drove her to become one of the biggest liars and scammers in recent memory. She told the world she had cancer and profited from a wellness app she claimed kept her alive. But when the charade came crashing down, Gibson finally had to face the consequences for her web of deceit, and the Apple Watch may be culpable in the whole thing. Gibson left her family home at 12 to live with a classmate and eventually moved in with a family friend. She attended Wynnum State High School in Queensland until she dropped out in the 10th grade. She would later claim that she was homeschooled. At 18, Gibson had a son, and with no real information as to who the father is, we imagine the thought of being a single mother drove her to pursue financial gains by any means necessary. According to the Daily Mail, a man named Clive Rothwell has been acting as the child's stepfather since he was born. Belle, however, claims to know very little about him, even though he's been funding her lifestyle for the past few years. After dropping out of school, Gibson worked for a catering company, perhaps an honest living, to care for her child. Her co-workers described Gibson as a lost soul, saying that she appeared disturbed and always told some really vivid stories. Her colleagues there remember her as not having any family or friends to hang out with, and they also recall her talking about cancer way before she officially announced she had it. Turning 18 was a bittersweet moment for Gibson, but that's if everything we know so far is genuine. The same year her son was born, in 2009, Gibson was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. The whole cancer story had different versions, and any keen person would have noticed some discrepancies as soon as it came out. Hiding behind her pretty face, fashionably tattooed body, and dazzling smile, the dots didn't add up every time Gibson narrated her tragic journey. After going public, Gibson became a media star. In interviews, she claimed to have suffered from malignant brain, blood, spleen, uterine, liver, and kidney cancers. With a few years left to live, Gibson felt scared for herself and her newborn son. She went on the offensive, claiming that a cervical cancer vaccine called Gardasil gave her cancer. Fast forward to November 2014, when her inspirational book, The Whole Pantry, told yet another version of her diagnosis. In the preface of the cookbook, Gibson claimed that her cancer had gone into remission and that no new cells had grown. It was all thanks to the dietary plans laid out in the pages to come. However, months before the book came out, Gibson posted that her cancer had spread, reaching her kidneys and liver on her social media page. Then, in a horrible twist of fate, her cancer moved to her brain, blood, spleen, and uterus. While her cancer, if real, could have spread that rapidly, it didn't line up with the timeline and facts laid out in her book. With star status as a relentless cancer fighter, it was now time for Gibson to start making the most out of her situation. The Whole Pantry app officially launched, and it launched with a bang. The health, wellness, and lifestyle app received a glorious reception, recording some 300,000 downloads. Each downloading cost $3.79. The app was so successful that Apple, yes, the one and only Steve Jobs founded Apple, flew her to California to launch the Apple Watch. Apple was so infatuated with Gibson's story that the Whole Pantry app became pre-installed on Apple Watches. The Whole Pantry book was published by Penguin Books and would later be sold in Ireland, Britain, and the US. The launch of the app and the book left Gibson feeling like a star. She amassed over 200,000 followers on Instagram and treated them to endless inspirational quotes such as, "Stop waiting for Friday, for summer, for someone to fall in love with you for life." Her unsuspecting fans in the online community fell for her empty quotes. The Whole Pantry app was voted the best food and drink app in 2013. By early 2015, Gibson had raked in over $1 million between app and book sales. Through her platforms, Gibson introduced and preached alternatives to curing cancer. She advocated for exercise, healthy eating, and a positive mindset, which to her credit are all things we should strive to do with our lives. However, to say that they'll cure cancer is a gross oversight. On her now deleted Instagram account with hundreds of thousands of followers, Gibson consistently promoted more controversial or potentially dangerous alternative medical practices, including Gerson therapy, which is basically a dietary-based cancer treatment. She also advocated for anti-vaccination and consumption of unpasteurized raw milk. In Australia, the sale of raw milk is illegal in all territories, showing that Gibson was blatantly ignoring her government's directive by preaching the gospel of raw milk consumption. In 2015, a 4-year-old kid identified as Apu Kangura died of hemolytic uremic syndrome. 7 others became seriously ill due to raw milk consumption, prompting the Australian government to put tougher regulations. Gibson's public display of a depleted, sickly, and soon dying person came with some goodies. Amazingly, nobody questioned her good looks, especially for someone dying from 6 different cancers. Avocado is good for you, but it's not that that good for you? The deals with the world-recognized brands like Apple and Penguin left more questions than answers. Gibson made millions, flew first class, and attended international conventions, but what does that say about the due diligence on the side of her sponsors? Apple helped take Gibson's public mockery and lie to international levels by gobbling up her lies without confirming them. Tech giant boosted Gibson's public profile credibility by including the whole pantry app in their Apple Watch prototype. Penguin did the same thing by granting Gibson an international cookbook deal. Two companies, therefore, failed the public and should take part of the blame for the roles they played. Isn't it fair to say that Apple and Penguin failed to do due diligence, thereby unknowingly aiding and abetting the crimes and forgery conducted by Gibson? What's your take? Let us know in the comment section below. Gibson claimed that she had undergone heart surgery several times and even died momentarily on the operating table, a story that attracted honest tears from those who sympathized with her. Still, as it turns out, it was just more lies, nothing genuine. Gibson also revealed in her previous interviews that during such trying times, she suffered a stroke. However, the mother of one wasn't able to substantiate all of these medical claims or mention the names of the doctors who diagnosed and treated her. Moreover, Pretty Lady didn't bear a single mark, surgical scars from her several operations. The hope was beginning to crack. Desperate times call for desperate measures, and Gibson's story touched the hearts of people around the world that were battling cancer. They bought hope in the form of her app and cookbook, never thinking for a moment that Gibson would be making it all up. Why would she? Why would someone lie about that? One such person is a girl named Maxine. When she was in high school, she was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. Doctors put her on medication, which left her with the usual side effects. But when she saw Gibson's story, she felt relieved, thought to herself, why not? So Maxine abandoned medication and started following Gibson's tip. Pixie Turner is another victim who fell for Gibson's rhetoric. She tried medication, but later joined Gibson's online wellness community. Both Maxine and Pixie were among the first members of Gibson's wellness program. Soon, Richard Goulet, a journalist and researcher on cancer ailments and treatment, noticed something wasn't adding up with Gibson, her app, and the message she relayed to her fans. February 2015, Richard met Gibson in Melbourne while she was promoting her book. During their interview, Gibson found it hard to answer some of Richard's questions and instead diverted into some far-fetched explanation. When he asked about her most recent cancers, Belle took him on a roller coaster of an answer. Ultimately, she said she was no longer seeing that doctor, was unsure whether or not she had these cancers. While Richard wasn't able to prove she was lying beyond a shadow of a doubt, he could speculate. He writes about his interview with Belle, and it spreads wide and far across the internet like a virus, like cancer. Gibson's story attracted split opinion. New revelations and contradictory stories popping up with every single interview. Thousands of her followers were hit by a cast of doubt, yet others still chose to believe her. The last nail on the coffin would be her failure to deliver the $300,000 donation she promised to give to charity. She also claimed that she gave away 25% of her company's profits, and in her book wrote that a large part of everything she earned was donated to charitable causes. In December 2013, Gibson held a fundraiser in Melbourne to raise money for 3 charities. One Girl, which runs education programs in Sierra Leone, was listed by Gibson as one of the beneficiary charities, but the organization didn't receive a dime after the fundraiser, and she only donated $1,000 after media inquiries following a 15-month wait. Another Asian-based foundation also said they never received a penny from Gibson after she told the media she'd given them $2,800. Gibson's boat was sinking. It was time to go down with the ship, or come clean about her lifelong fraud. In 2016, Gibson revealed that none of her cancers were true. She told Australian Women's, a weekly magazine, that she didn't want forgiveness. She believed people would hear her revelation and think, it's okay, she's only human. Her admission, as expected, attracted unwavering backlash from her followers. They felt betrayed and had every right to. Gibson had touted unbacked claims that holistic medicine had kept her cancer at bay. In reality, there was never any cancer to begin with. For those who were really suffering, the damage had already been done. There's no telling how many of their cancers had worsened since abandoning their doctors, putting their faith in Belle. Millions of people faulted her for putting the lives of cancer patients in danger by suggesting dietary approaches and telling them to abandon scientific methods. In September 2017, Gibson was fined $410,000 for making false claims about her donations to charity. As recently as April 2019, she had not settled the fine, and authorities have been hot on her trail, hoping to charge her with contempt of court. Later in 2019, Gibson claimed to be $170,000 in debt and only had $5,000 to her name. In January 2020, Gibson's home was raided, and the authorities seized some of her items in an attempt to recoup the unpaid fines, which by then, due to interest and costs, had exceeded $500,000. million. Her home was raided again in May 2021 with the same intention. A day after the first raid on her home, Gibson appeared on a video claiming to have been adopted by the Ethiopian community in Melbourne and even partly introduced herself in the indigenous Oromo dialect. She referred to the adoption as a gift from Allah, but in a quick retort, the president of the Australian Oromo community said that Gibson was not a registered member nor a volunteer. He was well aware of Belle's past and didn't want anything to do with it. Do you think Gibson's next venture is to defraud the Ethiopian community in Melbourne, or she genuinely transformed? But the thought that we can't shake is how a company like Apple could have been so easily duped. Did they bite down on Gibson's story with nothing but dollar signs in their eyes? Is Gibson's story more than anything a comment on corporate greed? Click here to watch one of these next videos.